pay for the war in Iraq and do that linkage. Here's what's wrong with the argument that's being offered. In the stimulus package, 90% of the American people received a tax cut. But it was overwhelmingly directed to payroll. The result is a lot of people didn't recognize the tax cut that was put into place. The Bush tax cuts overwhelmingly went to people at the very top. And let me give you a number, fact, not opinion. If you adopt the Bush tax cuts the way they are and leave them the way they are, it adds $700 billion to the deficits over the next 10 years. Now, you've heard the argument about pre-existing condition. Every year, children and families with diabetes come to my office. Previously, they could never get health insurance. How about that child who's 9 years old who visited recently, who's a hemophiliac? 9 years old and has exhausted a lifetime benefit. Keeping your children on their health insurance until they're 26 years old is a good idea. Medicare. Is there anybody in Congress who's been a greater champion of Medicare than I have? Half the revenue at Milford Regional comes from Medicare. Medicare has added life to years. The Ryan Roadmap offers vouchers for Medicare. Vouchers. And we shouldn't lose sight of that in part of this overall debate. We have debated health care since Harry Truman was president and what to do about it. We put a cap on out-of-pocket expenses. You can keep your insurance as you move from job to job. And guess what? Half the bankruptcies in America are healthcare related. Half. You lose your job, you lose your house, you lose everything because of a problem that comes up with a sick child. We attempted to build a safety net on that issue. And for the argument that it is cutting back on hospital employment, all you need to do is reference Sunday's Boston Globe, where the head of the Massachusetts Hospital Association indicated that these trends have come from people who in a downturn economically are delaying elective surgeries. That's part of the problem, and insurance companies have pushed back. Now, the Massachusetts model was indeed the one that was embraced. And I'm glad to hear that it was Bob Dole and Governor Mitt Romney who embraced the idea of a mandate. That wasn't pulled out of the air by my friends over here in the AFL-CIO. Instead, that came from the notion of actuarial reality. How do you get everybody into the system? 41 million people without health insurance. Right now, 51 million people without health insurance. It will be a long-term structural investment in stabilizing costs. And my hunch is that for big and small employers, they're going to find that this is a far more predictable system than the 11 to 14% increases every year in private health insurance costs. Nobody argued that this was going to cut costs. The argument simply was that we might stabilize costs.
Okay, we have another question that hits a lot more locally in this part of the district. This is, of course, referring to the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA's proposed stormwater regulation or phosphorus reduction program for the towns of Milford, Bellingham, and Franklin. Basically, where do you both stand on the proposed regulation, and what are your ideas and how are you going to assist the towns, and specifically our business communities, in dealing with this proposed regulation? Thank you.
Congressman Neal, please.
This one's too easy. When the Board of Selectmen in Milford and the Board of Selectmen in Bellingham and Representative Fernandez and Senator Moore called me on the phosphorus stormwater runoff as it impacted small business people in Milford, Franklin, and Bellingham, I got right at it. had the regional secretary come to a meeting in Boston with Representative Fernandez and Senator Moore, and we engaged them in the argument. That is an onerous business cost that is unjustified. I didn't try to weave my way around that issue. I was upfront on how to handle it. You shouldn't penalize these people because of backwater from the Charles River. That's the issue in a nutshell. The secretary came to a meeting in Bellingham with us and announced that they were going to do a long-term study that they were going to finance before they precipitously moved forward on this argument. Now that's an example of Brian Murray, Dino, and Bill Buckley calling their congressman, along with Representative Fernandez and Senator Moore, and saying, we need your help. I was there in 24 hours. We got right after it to make sure that they didn't offer an undue burden to small business people. Now, we all accept the idea of achievements that we've made with clean water, air, the food we eat, but there are times when you have to resist if you think that it is a burden that cannot be carried in an economic downturn. And that was the argument we made, and we prevailed.
I'll eat into my time just a moment to ask a question if I can. How many here people, if you show your hands, how many people here are wealthy? Yeah, that's usually the same answer I get when I ask how many people shop at Walmart. You know, the vision of wealthiness with regard to tax cuts is really a very personal issue, isn't it? It's about what's in your pocket at the end of the day. And so when we look at rescinding tax cuts, we're taking money out of your pocket, irrespective of how much money you earn. It's your choice what you do with that money. Secondly, on the Obamacare and health care, you cannot, I'm a businessman, you cannot provide services and be reimbursed at less than your cost and expect to stay in business. And that right now is the equation. Let's talk about the EPA, the stormwater runoff, and I applaud the congressman for rapid action, and I think it was very insensitive of EPA regulators to drop that regulation into the hopper without understanding what the full effect was going to be. Huge implications for small towns and cities, another unfunded mandate. Another example of what happens when we pass legislation at any level that says, I don't know exactly what the rules or regulations are going to be, but we'll let some regulatory agency figure that out in the future. And so we need to, I think, have a higher degree of responsibility when we pass legislation that says, this is what we really intend, and this is what we really need. We don't want anonymous agencies making regulations. Perhaps there ought to be a feedback loop or some sort of a sunset loop that allows Congress to take a look again at what regulatory agencies are layering onto our businesses and our towns and communities.
Thank you. Next question, Barry.
Okay, by far probably the most popular question. I got about 15 different versions of it. Try to decipher a little. I think you both have already touched on it. We'll get back into it right now again. Basically, would you rescind Obamacare? Yes or no? Why or why not? And maybe just touch a little more. Would you support the modification or repeal, any or all, of the healthcare reform bill? If so, please provide specifics.
And let's start with Tom Leslie, please.
Well, yes, the answer is I would rescind Obamacare. And the first question is, well, how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? Because we don't know how big a majority you're going to have. You probably won't have a veto-proof majority. Well, ladies and gentlemen, something very interesting is happening in America right now. This year, 2010, is the most important election probably of our lifetimes in our generation. We're going to send lots of new people down to the 112th Congress, and I hope I'm one of them. And